Joining us now for more on all of this is State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris. And I assume that, you correct me if I'm wrong, that you would just as soon not see all of these different contested primaries throughout the city.
I mean, look, it's not really for me to say. People are entitled to run. We have a democracy, and the local Democrats will choose. By that, I mean the local voters who are Democrats will choose who they want representing them. And so as long as we don't have a situation like we had several years ago where we had people getting elected as Democrats who then sat with the Republicans and cost us control of the Senate, the infamous IDC, as long as that's not in the picture, we welcome whoever ends up winning these elections, and we'll work with them.
But this is not exactly how you pictured this would turn out, correct? Thinking back a couple months ago, when the state legislature was drawing the lines, didn't necessarily look like this. These districts didn't necessarily look like this.
Not only didn't it look like this, but we wouldn't be sitting here at the end of August when so many New Yorkers are away having an election, and people are confused. It's the second primary within a couple of months that we're having because a Republican judge empowered by an out-of-control court of appeals, whose chief judge just resigned under a cloud of suspicion, decided this is the way they wanted to do things and acted in a way that I think was outside the scope of the Constitution. Of course, they decided otherwise. So here we are in August trying to get people out to vote.
When you say in violation of the Constitution, is there a legal remedy to any of this?
This is the problem. The Court of Appeals is the ultimate decider of how these things go. But there are specific provisions in the Constitution that say even if you find that the legislature did something off with the lines, the remedy is to give it back to them with instructions how to fix it, not to take it out of their hands and let a Republican judge in upstate New York decide how New York City's districts are going to look.
Yeah. What do you contend with the issue that these districts were originally gerrymandered to obviously favor Democrats, drawn by Democrats?
A couple things to say about that. Obviously, we disagree, and we think we complied very strictly with the requirements set in New York law. But as it relates to the state Senate lines, that Republican judge actually found there was no evidence of gerrymandering on the Senate lines, and yet the Court of Appeals threw them all out. So it just seems very vindictive. It seemed like something was amiss at the court. The chief judge is now gone, so who knows what was going on within the chambers of that court. But here, we're playing with the hand we got dealt. The Democrats in the state Senate for 10 years have dealt with members of our own party even who opposed us in the former governor, and here we are with the largest majority the state's ever had in the state Senate, and so we'll find a way to get through all of this.
Well, one of the bigger surprises has been this race in the Bronx that we were just talking about, where you have an incumbent, a longtime incumbent, Gustavo Rivera, who is not just being challenged, that happens, as you said, well, anybody can run if they feel like it, but members of his party, other state senators, have really just kind of turned their back on him. Was there something coming that you saw that might explain that?
I think Bobby had it right. Gustavo was a very independent-minded person, not necessarily a party loyalist in terms of local politics, and the party's organized against him now. I think they would say in their own defense that the way the lines were configured, his opponent was already running, and it just kind of ended up this way. But look, at the end of the day, whether it's inconvenient for an incumbent or not, the voters have the final say, and that's what we're here to find out in less than an hour, hopefully, is who they prefer to have representing them.
Thinking about Senator Rivera, he would obviously be put in, the more left-leaning progressive camp. How do you expect that to turn out tonight? Do you see some are predicting that progressives won't necessarily do well, that perhaps there's going to be a backlash after they did well in 2018?
Well, the good news is the polls close in a half hour and we'll find out. This is the hardest election, I think, for any of us to prognosticate that we've ever seen, because who knows who's turning out at the end of August. This is an unprecedented situation. I was talking to a friend at the Board of Elections. I said, is turnout high or low? And they said, well, I'll tell you something. It's the highest turnout we ever had for an August primary. And then she said, it's also the lowest turnout we've ever had in an August primary. There's never been one before. And so we don't know what we're dealing with. And who turns out is going to affect the outcome so much. It's just very hard to predict where everything lands.
Yeah, you don't have a primary. And look, there was none in my district. This is the first time. I've been voting here for, like close to 40 years. And for the very first time, there was no contested congressional primary, and there was no contested Senate primary. Is that because there are new lines and people just couldn't sort of figure it out in time?
Who knows? I mean, in some places there were more opponents because the lines got reconfigured, and in some there were less. The difference between now and June, of course, is we have whole swaths of the city and the state who don't have primaries at all. I didn't have one either, but not myself only, but my congressional representative doesn't have a primary. So people are calling me saying, well, how do we go to vote? I say, you don't actually go to vote today if you don't have a contest. Right. Of course, in June, we had the statewide primary, so everybody who was registered in the party got to vote. And so it was just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing where it landed. Some places, people who, like in the Gustavo Rivera example, more people were running in a particular district. In others, it was fewer. And it turned out very randomly at the end of the day.
Someone who is participating is Mayor Eric Adams. We know he has made his voice heard in several districts. He's endorsed candidates, including endorsing challengers, not necessarily the incumbent. I'm thinking of the Rivera race. He's endorsed Miguelina Camillo. And in the Brisport race in Brooklyn, he's endorsed Reverend Conrad Tillard. What do you make of the mayor's involvement in this?
I mean, like, the mayor's the leader of the city. He's entitled to express his support for candidates or not. What gets to me, though, is when there's a suggestion that he's trying to remake the Senate in his image. And that's where I take offense. There was an article where it was suggested that he's trying to make sure the Senate is less progressive than it is. We're very proud of the progressive majority we have. It's been very successful. We've had some of the most progressive accomplishments and most productive legislative sessions the state's ever seen. We had the foresight to codify Roe versus Wade in New York before the Supreme Court destroyed it. We had some of the safest gun laws in the country that we enacted that would not have happened without if the Republicans were in control. And so to the extent that there's some effort, I mentioned the IDC earlier, to start electing people that will collaborate together in his image, then I think we should all be concerned. If he wants to go support people in individual districts, that's his right. But when he starts suggesting that he's trying to elect a block of people to do something in the Senate, that sounds awfully familiar to me and not in a good way.
Well, he certainly suggested that this could perhaps be about bail reform. We know that he wants the state legislature to once again revisit bail reform. They've obviously done so twice since it was originally passed. There's no appetite necessarily for that in the state legislature as of this point. So do you think that he's trying to make some sort of block to visit that issue in particular?
Look, my personal view on this issue, I've said it publicly many times, is he's the mayor of a city that has a crime problem, and he's trying as hard as he can to keep the focus off himself. And so he's pointing at Albany, he's pointing here, he's pointing there, anything but himself. Of course, we know the data is now out. We've had the reforms in place for a couple of years, and there is no reason to think that the reforms we made on bail are connected to the crime increase. The crime increase is happening across the country, including in places that didn't touch their bail laws. And so this is a dynamic that's happening everywhere, and I would suggest the mayor should be more focused on doing what's necessary to deal with the problem rather than trying to point fingers. For example, most people don't realize the clearance rate, which is the rate at which crimes are solved, is at a low point. Less than 30% in some cases where the police aren't solving the crime. So if you're a wannabe criminal, are you going to be deterred because maybe the bail laws may or may not let you out if you don't have enough money to pay? Or are you going to think to yourself, I've got like a 2/3 chance of getting away with whatever I'm doing? So I would suggest they should roll up their sleeves, focus on actually solving crimes, and that would have a much bigger dent in the crime problem than focusing on Albany.
The mayor has been pretty forthcoming that what he wants to do, among other things, is get the general public to put pressure on the legislature to make some of the changes that he wants to see legislatively. Whether or not, I mean, you just gave a pretty detailed opinion about why you don't think that's a good idea, but just as a practical matter, I mean, the politics of trying to influence the state Senate, does that even work? Sort of, you know, trying to get a lot of people to make phone calls or whatever it is he's hoping for?
Sure, it works, and we listen and we try and make intelligent and reasoned decisions. Courtney mentioned we have already adjusted the laws twice. And so he keeps screaming about recidivists and repeat offenders. That's already been dealt with. And that's what's so frustrating for so many of us. He has a big press conference talking about a whole bunch of things that we've already done. And so what exactly is the problem? If it's recidivists, they can now be held on bail, just like they were before. If it's gun crimes, almost all of them can now be held on bail. Some of the cases he was citing were people who paid their bail and got out, which has nothing to do with the reforms, of course. So it's a huge effort at misdirection. It's unfortunate, and it's actually impeding our attempts to make progress in the fight against crime.
No question, a lot of people are going to be heading to the polls tonight thinking about crime. But thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It's time now for a break.